everybody, it's Drew with Southern Yankee Innovations, and the weather finally turned around and started to warm up so we could get to the chinking. Before we could do that, we had to go through and mesh each of the joints. For this I used diamond lath or stucco mesh, and I just have the shear attachment for my impact, and that seems to be the fastest way. You can do it with a set of tin snips, but your forearm will feel it by the end of the day. This goes pretty good. I just do a rough measurement. If I know it's 5 inches on the right side and 4 inches on the left, I just will kind of run that down through and cut a few strips and just kind of adjust it as need be. I've seen a lot of videos where people will just hang the whole sheet and then go through and cut it while it's hanging. That's another option. You'll have a lot less waste that way. I just feel like, to me, this was more efficient. So when you're hanging the mesh, you want it to be as straight as possible. You don't want it to be, it's very easy to push in and make it kind of concave. But you want it to be as straight as possible, and you want it to work like a water were falling out, like a drip edge. So you want it tucked underneath the top log and just a little bit back from the face of the bottom log. You need to go back far enough where when you go to chink it, that the mesh will be completely covered and not exposed. But you want it to be out far enough where it will have a good bond once you go to chink it. So I went through and got the mesh all up in place, and there's a little bit of like where a branch was on the log. So all I did was just take my snips and kind of trim out around it so that way I can get the mesh tucked up underneath there. So some of the nails aren't drove in all the way, and it's not really going to mess with anything. You just have to make sure that they're nice and secure in the log, and if they start to bend, you can just bend them over and just make sure they're grabbing and holding the mesh in place. I do nails about every 5 or 6 inches, and on top and on bottom, and then once I get it ran all the way across, I'll just kind of go through with my hand and tap it just to see how loose it is, and if it's a little loose, I'll go ahead and put in another nail to tighten it all up. This can be a very time-consuming process. I found if you have 2 or 3 guys and you just go through and just cut a bunch of strips, a bunch of different lengths and thicknesses, you can just kind of go through and plug and play and make everything work, and it seems to be pretty efficient. Now that the top's all fitted, I'm going through and trimming off the bottom, and that way I'll get a nice face with the chinking. Like I said, you want to go back about an inch probably from the very face of the log, and that'll give you enough room to overlap with the chinking and still get a good connection. So at this point I already had the exterior already chinked, and I was getting ready to insulate before I meshed the inside, and I just used rock wool. It's a very dense and easy to use insulation. You just buy one of those knives on Amazon. They're like 10-15 bucks. Cuts very nice, and you can do 2 battens at the same time and rip them down into whatever widths you need. There was a variety of, some would be 2-inch, some would be 3-inch, some would be 8 inches. This cabin had some pretty wide chink joints, so you could just go through and cut it and make work with what you had. So here you can see how easy it is to apply. It was an R15 insulation value, so you just push it in, and every once in a while you just kind of got to make sure you tuck in the tops and the bottoms, because when you put the mesh over it, it likes to kind of hang out. That spot to the left is behind the chimney, and we hadn't addressed that situation yet. This is the opposite wall. You can see where the chinking's already in there, and you just work your way across. It goes pretty quick. So the forecast was nice to do some chinking. It was 48 degrees that morning, which is about as cold as I really like to do it. And then the next couple of nights were in the 50s. I do 10 scoops of sand, just a fine masonry sand, to half a bag of mortar. And I use Heidelberg's Type S mortar. The color we got was a white oak, and it looks pretty tan, almost like an almond color once you first mix it, but it dries to a nice off-white. When I do half a bag, I just score the top of it and then grab from the corners on each side and pull it up, and then it can rip the other side, and it keeps it pretty consistent. So when I mix it, I try to mix the sand and the mortar together before I start adding water. On this batch, I actually added a little bit too much water. You want it to be still pretty firm. The softer it is, it takes a lot longer for it to set up and work, and then it also loses a little bit of stickiness, and just you have to fight with it a little bit longer to fill in your chink joints. On a smaller joint, it's not as big of a deal, but like I said, some of these joints are almost 8 inches wide, and when it's really watery, it makes it a little bit harder to fill the gap. So I'll tip the mixer while it's running, then I'll turn it off and scrape it out. Just a reminder, never stick your hands in one of these things while it's running. It'll suck you in a heartbeat. So the thing I've learned about chinking is everyone's kind of got their own little way of doing it. For me, I just go through, try to work my way all the way across and just get everything filled in, and then I'll go back through and work it smooth. And then as it sets up towards the end, I'll go through with a brush and a little bit of water and just smooth the face off. Some people like having the chink marks or the trowel marks in it. Some people like it as a smoother finish. That's just a personal preference. The thing I've noticed though is if you have more than one person, they're all going to be a little bit different. You'll be able to tell who did which wall. So there's a little bit less uniformity if you leave the trowel marks in it than if you brush everything. doing this, again, you want to make sure you create like a drip edge. So you're going to want to go behind the face of the top log and then flush with the face on the bottom log, and that will allow any type of water to not get in between the logs. It just helps you create a longer lasting building. One of the most common issues with a log cabin is improper chinking. If the water, or if the chinking is flush with the top log instead of tucked behind it, water can get behind the chinking and it'll sit and rot the logs out below it. So that is a very common issue that will cause failure to a log cabin, or premature failure. Technique I found is I'll just go through and I'll load my hawk and just come through and push it into the mesh. That spot there, I could see that the mesh was a little bit too far, so I just pushed it back up just to try to make sure it was back in further so the mesh wouldn't be exposed. So here you can see, I went through, did all the joints on this side of the chimney, and I'm just going through and just taking off the higher spots and just trying to smooth it out. And then as it sets up more, I'll go through and brush it. While I'm going through and doing this, I'm just double checking, make sure all the mesh is covered, making sure nothing's exposed. And like so you can see there's a little bit of a mesh exposed probably, so I was just making sure it was covered up. Last thing I'll do on the joint is I'll brush it. A little bit of water goes a long way, so don't be afraid to try to get a lot of it off. And I just go side to side. Sometimes I'll go a little bit of up and down if I need to try to smooth spots out. If your brush is too wet, it'll bring the sand out of the mortar, and it'll be pretty rough. Or if you just do it soft with a relatively dry brush, it keeps everything pretty smooth. You don't want to rush it. You have to wait till the mortar's somewhat set up, or else you'll just fight yourself and it'll make more work for you in the long run. I'll go through and do this for a little bit, and then I'll find spots that need a little bit touch up, and I'll add in some mortar, and then I'll work it. I don't like to add more chinking or more mortar to a spot that I've already chinked, so I like to just make sure I get it all done the first time. Alright, so here is the exterior of the cabin, and I'll kind of zoom in where you can see how the chinking is like a drip edge, and it's behind the face of the upper log and then goes out to the face of the lower log, and that'll help your cabin last a lot longer. So here you can kind of see the color difference between the mortar as it was dry and the mortar as it's wet. So you see how it's got the almond color, and then when it's dry it turns more to a white. And then here is just some of the process pictures, and then this was the exterior all done, and then I'll go on the inside so you can see the interior all done. We still have to trim everything out and put on the front porch, but that was kind of just the gist of it, so you could see everything and how it looks at the end. I hope you learned something, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.